I want to thank the committee for being here. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for the fourth meeting of the work group on pandemic spending. At our last meeting, we received testimony from Mr. David McGlon of the Department of Labor, who provided us with an overview of the department's activity throughout the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. This is the agency involved and in charge of unemployment claims. As some of you may recall, I was frustrated by the lack of information the Department of Labor was able to provide. I want to thank the department for following up to my questions, and I look forward to working with them in the future to answer further outstanding questions. Today, this work group continues its mission to fulfill its legislative mandate of oversight and accounting for the billions of taxpayer dollars that have been expended over the last year and a half. I believe it is both morally and fiscally prudent that we continue to evaluate these transactions to guard against waste, fraud, pandemic profiteering, and looting of the public treasuries. The purpose of today's meeting is to hear from stakeholder groups who have experienced firsthand the process of requesting and receiving pandemic relief funds and how these funds have been utilized. It's my hope that today's presentations will provide perspective of those who have been on the front lines, assisting those who need relief the most. It's also my desire that today's presenters will speak to the parity and equitable distribution of relief funds and will bring to light any persisting inequalities that plague Maryland's distribution of aid. Just like every work group meeting, this meeting is open to the public, both by live stream and in person, so that Marylanders can witness how their taxpayers' money has been spent. Today, we'll hear first from Ms. Roxy Herbeckian, President of Unite Here Local 7. Unite Here represents workers in the hotel, gaming, food service, manufacturing, textile, laundry, and airport industries, economic sectors that we know were significantly impacted by the pandemic. Following Ms. Herbekian, we will receive a presentation from Ms. Heather Iliff, President of Maryland Nonprofits, an association representing hundreds of nonprofits from across Maryland. Finally, we will receive a small business perspective from Ms. Naddia Clute of the Maryland Small Business Development Center. Ms. Clute is the team leader for the Hispanic Business Center within the SBDC. I'm indebted to all three of you for attending. With that, I will call on Ms. Herbekian to begin your presentation. Thank you. Oh, fabulous. There's Roxy right there. Yes. And yes, thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to present today to this work group committee. As Comptroller Francho said, my Unite Here represents workers in the hospitality industry, an industry that was hit very hard by the pandemic. So I will never forget March 15th, 2020, the phone just started ringing at the union office and all of our cell phones. Because usually that time of year in March, things are starting to get busy. The workers at the Hilton had all been recalled, convention center, there's lots of work. And as the day went on, more and more calls came in. People say, oh, this got canceled, this got canceled, this got canceled, this got canceled.
Roxy, you need to press the microphone button, I'm sorry.
Excuse me.
Is that good? Okay, thank you. And
Why don't you start over again? Nobody heard her?
It was soft, it was faint.
Well, if they haven't heard it, start again, Roxy, because I think it's a very good story. Go ahead.
okay. All right. My name is Roxy Herbeckian. I'm the president of Unite Here Local 7. Unite Here is a national a North American union that represents workers in the hospitality industry, an industry that was hit very hard with the COVID-19 pandemic. I have a very clear recollection of about March 15th of 2020 at the union office. The phone started ringing, our cell phone started ringing, members were calling. Usually this time of year in spring is when a lot of our members are recalled to work and there's lots of work. Folks started calling from the Hilton, from the convention center, from the Hyatt, from the Marriott, telling us that events, conventions, meetings were being canceled. And then that weekend, the casinos closed completely with very short notice, right? Because I think there was a very prudent move to close these sectors where there was a lot of people gathered and a lot of misinformation or a lot of unknowns about how COVID was being spread. So I'm going to go through today sort of what was the impact in terms of employment in the sectors that we represent, where it stands today, and the federal programs that our members and other workers in the hospitality industry were able to use, and sort of the pros and cons, where they really seemed to work, where they didn't really seem to work. So this is our these are the industries we represent. Hotel, restaurant, convention. A lot of the hotel business, a lot of the big hotel business is not driven by leisure travel. It's driven by big meetings and conventions. That is certainly true of Baltimore City. That's true of DC, which is sort of spills over into business for Maryland. But the convention business is critical. Airport, food and beverage. There are right now about 800 workers who are employed in food and beverage and retail at the airport. And that goes into two sectors. It's the folks that work inside the airport, but it's also the folks that do what we call airline catering. They do the food for the airline industry. Institutional food. A lot of people work in institutional food, whether it's in hospitals, universities, schools. We're talking about like big cafeterias. It also is in business and industry as well. Sports and entertainment venue, Camden Yards, the arena, the stadiums, and casinos. Casinos are major employers here in Maryland. There's 5 major casinos and employ, I'm sure, upwards of 15,000 people. So this is our experience in terms of layoffs. As you'll see, April of 2020 in the hotel and convention sector, 100% layoff. Right?
Could you just repeat that? Because that is a stunning percentage of it.
The hotels, they first lost all the convention business, and then many of them just closed their doors because there was no business. And there was the threat of COVID, and the industry was really trying to figure out what to do. Right? Folks did not know what to do. So everyone was laid off. Institutional feeding. The universities also really closed down. A lot of them, they stopped having in-person classes. So there was just a few people working to provide some sort of food service on campus. But at Hopkins, at Morgan, at Coppin, at Loyola, we represent a lot of food service workers. Everything went virtual. Event venues, 100% layoff. It was going to be the Camden Yards workers were going to go back to work March 26th. They just did not go back to work, and they didn't work the entire season. Airport food and beverage, same thing. The airlines kept some going, but all across the country, the food and retail closed again because there was such an unknown with COVID. The prudent thing was not to have that business. Airline catering, again, 95%. They just kept a few people on to do some servicing of the flights that were operating. Casinos closed completely until June, right? So in June of 2020, we saw some things starting to come back, but you'll see the numbers that are still very high for unemployment, right? Casinos opened, but they didn't open all their food service. So they opened the gaming, they opened the slot workers, slot attendants, but a lot of the food and beverage didn't. And as you see, it still hasn't completely come back. But let's skip over to November 2021. We're still dealing with the effects of the of COVID in many industries, particularly hotel and convention. Right? Particularly hotel and convention. Institutional feeding is back. We have 100% of our members are recalled in all of the universities, the schools, business and industry, institutional feeding. Event venues are down a little bit, but they're still operating. For example, this year Camden Yards did open its food and retail, but without any vendors, and they proceeded that way. So they're still down. And then some of these other numbers, honestly, we don't know if they'll ever completely come back. Perhaps the airport food and retail will come back as airline travel increases. We're certainly seeing an upswing now as we get ready for the holidays. But in airline catering and casinos, that may never come back. And a lot of the talk around the hotel industry now is, yes, the business will come back, but certain things will close permanently. For example, a lot of hotels were already reducing their room service business, so they're not going to reopen it. A lot of them were doing away with like the VIP, Hilton Honors type programs, Hyatt Regency type programs where they had special treatment for people who had a certain number of points. They're closing those. So we think there's going to be some permanent reduction in the number of jobs. The other thing that we're pushing back on in the hotel industry is the industry use this as an opportunity to stop doing daily cleaning, which is a real save on labor. It doesn't really make the rooms any more hygienic or cleaner, but that's again something that they are, I believe, seeking to do in a permanent way. So that's where we are now. People are still laid off. The programs that affected our members and that they were able to partake in were the unemployment insurance, the federal programs, which were all administered through the Maryland Department of Labor Division of Unemployment Service. Direct payments they received from the Federal CARES Act money. There was direct federal support to the airline industry, which the airline catering workers also were able to take advantage of, and then the Paycheck Protection Program. So in terms of federal unemployment, it was a godsend for people to get that additional $600 a week. I mean, it allowed people to actually live and pay their bills and not get evicted. They lost that, and then after President Biden was elected in March, came a federal program with an additional $300. And again, that was a huge help to folks. The fact that the number of weeks were extended all the way through September of 2021 was a huge help because, as you saw from the previous chart, a lot of people were still laid off. And then the gig workers. While we don't represent those folks directly, a lot of hospitality workers use that as a second job, or they have family members that use it. And that was a big help because parents who used to maybe go out and do that work were now home watching their kids. The cons, it was, I don't have to tell anyone in this room, it was very difficult for people to get their unemployment benefits. Once the calls stopped from the everything's closing, they became, how do we get our unemployment benefits? And we had lots and lots of programs, and I'm sure the nonprofits had the same experience because people were calling and didn't know what to do, and we had to help them. And some folks were not very comfortable with online services. They were used to unemployment. They'd make a phone call, they'd go visit the local office, and all of a sudden they weren't able to do that anymore. We spent a lot of time, and we had a lot of volunteers working out of our office helping people try to navigate the unemployment system. But as you know, it wasn't just a problem of navigating, it was a problem that the system really wasn't prepared for the volume. And so it was very difficult, and we had people that didn't get benefits for a very long time. It was very difficult to reach DOL staff. We had hoped that we would be able to establish, some kind of relationship so that we could at least know that we were giving people proper information, and we weren't able to do that. We tried to do it through our state delegates and senators who were also inundated with calls, but this persists. We still have people who haven't gotten all of their unemployment benefits. This is persisting. Qualifying standards were often unclear, conflicting information on the website. And then, as you all know, Governor Hogan wanted to stop the program 2 months early. So 4 of our members, along with 2 other workers, were party to a suit that was successful, and we were able to, along with the Public Justice Center, work together to maintain the benefits till September, which was very important because, as I said, even though there was a certain perception like people don't want to work, I mean, the reality was people were not being recalled to work. So, I mean, I'm sure there's going to be a complete discussion about unemployment in the state because it continues to be a difficulty for folks, even today. Yeah.
On that point, do you mind if I jump in and just ask a question?
Briefly, because we have a bunch of these presentations.
Sure, I'll be very
Mr.
brief.
Schaffel.
Very related to what you just said. Can you go back to the last slide also? Or I'm sorry, one before that with the percentages. Yeah, so casinos still short 15%, right? Their volume is back, right? So some share of that is them, I guess, deciding not to bring back some workers, right? And some of this is, we know COVID's not over. People still have their own health concerns. There's still childcare issues. There's a number of reasons that make it difficult. Do you know anything about your members? You know, how many of them are having a hard time getting back because they have some of these ongoing COVID hardships versus those that want to come back and can't get rehired?
Right. There are some folks that I know who, for their own health reasons, for their family health reasons, people have sort of retired early, some people, and decided they're not going to go back into the workforce. Most of the people in our industry don't have the option to choose not to work. So we don't have a lot of people who are choosing not to work. And I'm just give you an example. We've been really trying now to help people get employed. So whenever we have, for example, a university cafeteria that says, hey, we need to hire 20 people, we send it out to everybody. Are you interested? And I mean, we send that out. We get 50 names. We get 50 calls back and people wanting a job, right? Some of it too is folks, like let's take the hotel industry. They were used to making a fairly decent wage. A fairly lucrative job in the hotel industry is to be a banquet server. And that completely exists because of convention business. And so where you're used to making $60,000, $70,000 a year, and now you want to go, a restaurant wants to pay you $3.63 an hour, it makes it hard, right? So a lot of people have gone to gig jobs or different things. So we don't have a lot of people who are voluntarily not working, who just have decided not to work. Yeah. I hope that answers your question. Yeah. Okay. The direct federal payments were pretty problem-free. That was pretty problem-free, and people got that money, and it was direct, and it was very helpful. Folks are still getting the child tax credits, the extra $300 per employee per child, and that has permitted a lot of people to get back to work and get their kids into daycare. So that is a very, very, very helpful program to folks in the hospitality industry. I mentioned earlier the CARES Act money that went directly to the airlines. Because our airline catering workers work directly for contractors that contract with the airlines, the money that went to the airlines also served to pay them for their entire layoff period, which was huge. And they got an extra $2 an hour premium pay. All that will come to an end in December. But it appears that industry is starting to come back. So I think folks will be back to work. But folks in the airline industry fared much better than our other hospitality members. Paycheck Protection. This is a huge program, and we experienced it both as understanding how the employers where our members worked were affected, but also as the union. So as our members were laid off, the only income to the union is union dues. So of course our income went down. We had to lay folks off. We had to have people come in and volunteer. And so with the second round of PPP loans, organizations like ours, which is a 501c5, were permitted to apply, which we did. And we got about a $63,000 loan, which enabled us to bring back 2 people and have that bridge. So it really did work and really was helpful in terms of bringing people back. What was interesting was being on that side of it, as I could then experience how the employers were experiencing this program. And it was very streamlined in terms of being an organization applying for the loan. We did it through our bank. We applied. It was, we got the money fairly quickly. And then we had very clear guidelines on what we had to prove to have the loan forgiven. And so I sort of experienced that on that side. What has been really a problem, and I'm going to give an example, is some employers who took that money and then did not recall workers. So in Baltimore City, we were able to pass a law that if workers had been laid off due to the pandemic, when the business came back, the employer had to contact those workers first. And that, along with the PPP, has worked quite well. We have an experience that I want to share, and it's not the only one, but it's an illustration of a hotel property in Columbia, Maryland. Before the pandemic, it was called the Sheraton Columbia Hotel, a very nice hotel there, you'll know, Columbia, Maryland, beautiful on the lake. And before the pandemic, the employer had told the workers that they were gonna do renovations, they'd keep the hotel partially open and do the renovations. Once COVID hit, the employer said, look, we're gonna close and we're just gonna stay closed until we complete the renovations. Fine. That now has happened. The employer had its grand opening last week. For the last 2 months, the workers have approached and said, listen, we want to come back to work. He's refused to bring them back to work. This is a company that received 2 separate PPP loans in a total of over $2 million. And in both of their applications, from the information we've received from the Small Business Administration, they said the money was to recall 120 hotel workers, which they haven't. So we filed a complaint with the Small Business Administration. We're working with Kwame Mfume, who's the congressman for the area. But these workers are still trying to get back to work. And this is a company that got the money. And I would like to say that the owner of this company, David Costello, is a local construction and developer. And his construction company got 2 other loans of over $7 million. So this is an employer who got the money, but the workers are still laid off, wanting to come back to work. So that is still an issue for us that we're pressing on, and people still trying to get their unemployment. Those are 2 areas that, the pandemic we're still dealing with.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Roxy?
So I want to thank you guys very much for the opportunity. Any questions? I'm available.
Yes, thank you very much. That was very informative. And thank you, Roxy, for your leadership over the years. You kind of downplayed, stay up there. 'Cause- Yeah, no, stay there, please. I have some tough questions for you.
Okay, I'm ready.
Yeah, don't leave the hot seat. But, you downplayed the importance of your organization in getting the $300 payment that was basically appropriately free, very important dollars, and had nothing to do with Maryland taxpayers. It was all federal money. So thank you for all of the hard work that you represent. I know that the hard-working men and women that you represent have borne the disproportionate brunt of both the economic and public health impacts. And think about it.
Yeah.
Think about their living conditions, which, because often they are low-wage earning jobs, they're in congested environments as far as their own housing. So they're doubly disproportionately affected. And the pandemic initially was a devastating one. And you, as our frontline and essential workers, kept the country and the economy going. So thank you. Your members should be saluted, not, put aside.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
that's why
they need
people
to-
feel
yeah.
so.
That's why we're doing this.
Yeah, that's why people are so upset at that example I
Yes.
gave you. I mean,
Got it.
it's,
But the slide you put up, I believe it's the 3rd slide, outlining the percentages of workers that were laid off during the pandemic. That was really sobering because we aren't out of the pandemic yet. 100% of hotel and convention workers, 100% of event venues, 100% of airport food and beverage and retail employees, 100% of the casinos. Can you speak just a little bit? I'm sure you were obviously there assisting your members about the state's handling and management of unemployment checks. I get the drift from your presentation that the federal government had a streamlined process that seemed to work in other areas. Well, the federal unemployment money all came down to the state. And if you could just comment on, are you still experiencing difficulty in obtaining unemployment benefits? The Department of Labor keeps thumping its chest and holding press conferences saying that 90% plus of all claims have been handled. I'm not sure that's the case, number one. And number two, you've got a whole bunch of unemployed Marylanders, I think, who are stuck in the bureaucratic inertia. Nobody seems to be able to pick up the phone over there. and you mentioned your customer service work. I guess what my concern is that we're not getting level information here from the Department of Labor. And they claim that they have unemployment fraud detection, but we're estimating that up to $2 billion may have been sent directly to fraudsters. Can you believe that?
Wow.
So if you could just comment a little bit on what your view is of the state versus the federal government, I would be grateful.
I learned more about unemployment insurance this last year than I ever knew. And it wasn't like I was unfamiliar with it before, because it's fairly common in the hospitality industry that that people get laid off. Like it's a cyclical kind of business. So people were pretty used to, and we were very familiar with, it's slow, there's no business, going to apply for unemployment, keep your claim open for a month or two. And maybe you go back to work a few times here and there, but you keep your claim open. So we were pretty familiar with that. So a lot of folks approached this period as, okay, well, we know how this works, but this was just what worked for people before didn't work. And so we had a committee of members who were pretty good at this stuff, who they kind of met, and they tried to figure out, okay, what's the best advice we can give people? And you could just never catch up with it, because there was nothing really standard about it. It seemed like it felt like, from where we were, that it was not a very competent rollout of a system. Like, maybe there was a system, but no one could tell what it was or what to do, or if they tried to do it. Things as simple as you got a call, they told you where to call back, you'd call back, and that line was disconnected. I mean, just things that, right, people would just throw their hands up.
Okay, I get the drift, and I think some other members may have more questions, but it ruins the trust and confidence
Yes.
between the residents of our state and their state government. They don't identify federal government, state government. They just can't put up with how screwed up it is.
Right.
So thank you for trying to sort through it. We have all sorts of decoders over in our agency that can help on an ad hoc basis, but it's not us. It's not the rest of government. It's that particular agency. So I would like to switch to the major pieces of legislation that were passed by state and federal government that provided direct aid to individuals, families, and businesses of all sizes. We have data that shows that these direct stimulus grants and aid to businesses staved off what would have been a complete economic devastation. And trust me, I am welcoming the federal aid, because without it, without it, we would have really been up the creek. So thank you for being supportive of the federal stuff. What we're concerned about, I think, is at the state level. I know that it's hard to imagine what it looks like when tens of thousands of Marylanders found themselves without a job, including so many of your members. But frankly, without the federal aid that we welcomed, it would have been a lot worse, I think, is your testimony. From your perspective and that of your members, what was the impact of the federal and state aid relief to businesses, especially when it comes to layoff prevention? Did you see more of your employees get hired back once those funds hit the businesses' bank accounts through the PPP and Relief Act? What are your perspectives and experiences on that? And do you see the same dysfunction that the federal government seemed to have avoided and the state government seemed to have unfortunately embraced?
That is certainly true of unemployment, and I want to thank the Comptroller for supporting us and pushing back on the governor when you tried to end those benefits, because that was critical for so many people. So we've certainly seen it there, that the federal money was there, the programs were there, and in fact, when we were pushing back in Maryland, we got a lot of assistance from the U.S. Department of Labor in helping us push back, and that was extremely helpful. The PPP thing, the PPP money and employers being held accountable is an area, and I'm
Right.
not sure what role the state can play.
I'm more concerned with and I recognize the issue you put up there, but I'm more concerned about the businesses that didn't get anything.
Mhm.
Still haven't gotten anything.
Right.
Couldn't figure it out
Mhm.
because they didn't have a bank like you guys,
Mhm.
perhaps, that was knowledgeable. So
Right.
maybe you could get back to us on that. I did want to ask about what your members, how they benefited or not through Relief Act funds from the state and the federal government, just privately, individually.
Yeah, a lot of people did, and that was something that I feel like we were able to coach people on, like where to check, how to find that money, and a lot of people got that, and that was super helpful because soon after it was announced, they actually got the money.
Got
So
Yes, like immediately.
yeah, soon
Like
after it was
we
announced, they
need
got
it,
the money.
like we need money. Okay, what about the equity and demographic makeup of particularly your food services sector? What are we talking about as far
Well,
as?
look, folks in the
uh,
hospitality industry did not have the opportunity to work from home. They couldn't just take their laptop home and continue working. So when you're not working, it brings up all kinds of things, not just the paycheck, but your health insurance, right?
Mhm.
We have folks who had to dip into their 401ks and take the penalties because they needed the money or they had the health concerns. So we had to do a lot to help folks navigate the Maryland Connection, which did provide some help to folks in getting health insurance. But also our union health fund subsidized a lot of premiums for members during the layoff so that they could keep their same health insurance. But you know, I think that's the main thing. And most of our members are African American and immigrant workers, and they did not have those. They had to go out and find some way to work if their unemployment didn't come through. And they weren't, except for in Baltimore, we have a law that says they have to recall people. We know that recall is not happening everywhere, like our experience in Howard County.
And that's just in the city. Okay, so hindsight's 2020, but we're trying to do lessons learned and best practices should, God forbid, another pandemic or something like this ever occur again. We're not necessarily pointing fingers, but it's hard not to when you hear
Sure.
your description of things.
Mhm.
Is there any other areas where you think Maryland fell short, and where do we as a state continue to fall short, for example? Even now, as you comment that things are slowly getting back to normal, obviously there are COVID variants and other unpredictable circumstances around the corner.
Yeah. Look, I think the state really needs to look at the unemployment insurance. I mean, under Governor Hogan, the amount that the companies pay into it was already down, and I think it was depleted. And I only can expect that the difficulties they had with technology because it's outdated and old, and that's still a problem. And if tomorrow we went, 100% layoff in an industry again, I don't have any faith that it's any better now than it was in 2020.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Deputy Comptroller Sharon Bernardi, if you have any questions.
I just had one quick question. It sounded like you really had to redesign the way you served your members, and just wanted to get some insight in what did you have to do as an association so that you could stay abreast of all of this change and the services that you had to provide your members, and what could the state do better to make certain that you have access to all that information that you need to disseminate?
Yeah, we had to pivot very quickly, and we had to learn how to do meetings on Zoom really well. That was, I mean, we did. In a way, it made us, it changed the way we communicated with our members. People were no longer at work. We couldn't just go and see them and talk to them. So we had to really quickly improve our communications. And then we had to try to educate ourselves as much as we could on these programs that were available to our members. Like it would have been helpful to have someone who could have done that with us or been a liaison with us. We don't expect the government to come and do it all, but if we could at least have had someone who could give us reliable information so we could give people reliable information, it would have helped. And I think it probably would have streamlined the system. So yeah, I mean, that would have been super helpful if there was someone that either somehow through the labor movement or through the industry was a resource person that we could go to, and then we could disseminate the information correctly to our members. Would have been helpful.
What do you think about the fact that up to $2 billion may have gone directly to fraudsters? I just find that stunning that, and apparently we're a lot of people are concerned about the lack of fraud detection.
No, it's a problem. No, absolutely.
Mr. Hildebrand.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. Oh, there we go. First, thank you so much for coming. Very much appreciate the presentation. I've got a couple questions. The first one is about the shuttered venue grants. Is that impacting, I mean, I know they're giving money to these venues that are still operating far below normal. Is that helping to bring your members back to jobs, or is it just money to the venue? Do you know anything about that?
It's hard for us to tell. It's hard for us to tell. I mean, I know a lot of companies have gotten the money. The information we've been able to, the public information we've been able to get is who got loans, who got the money. We can't always tell who forgave it. When we come across situations like the one I described, then we know it. We do know around the country that this is an issue of companies getting money and not recalling workers.
Okay, and that's my next, on the PPP part of that, is that, and I think you're saying it is that part of the normal experience? They're getting $10 million and your workers are still sitting at home that should have been recalled.
We are finding that. I'm in communication with other Unite Here locals around the country, and we are finding that look, it's like anything. There are some bad actors and there's some good actors. There's some folks, they get the money, they're recalling the workers, it's good. But then there are some bad actors that are, taking advantage. And we have been in touch with our congressional delegation from Maryland and to look into this, because I think that we have situations where companies have taken the money and aren't recalling the workers.
And then my last one, the comptroller asked about lessons learned. And I know on the hot seat, it's really hard to kind of go through that. Would you like to submit for us, sort of as a follow-up, some of those, the details of lessons learned, changes, things that could have been better, and, your suggestions on how to make those better?
I'd be happy to do that.
We'd
Thank you.
love to have you then send it in. Thank
Happy to
you.
do that.
And with that, Mr. Comptroller.
Thank you, David, and Mr. Schaffel.
I really got to ask my question earlier, so I'm good as is.
Mr. Riley.
Thank you, Comptroller. Thank you for the presentation. Briefly and quickly, as a general idea, with the percentage of all of your members, how many are still waiting for benefits that they haven't received? Just as ballpark.
Of people who applied for benefits who still are waiting to get them, 15 to 20%.
So 15 to 20% still. And how many members do you have?
We represent, between us and the other Unite Here locals around the state, we represent about 10,000 people.
Okay, thank you. And the last question, related to the PPP loans that David and Comptroller have spoken about, I'm assuming, but I shouldn't, that there is, as part of the payment, there is no requirement for documentation that something has actually happened as far as a business is concerned?
So if it's a loan that's under $2 million, it's not an automatic requirement, but it's permitted, but you may be asked to do it. If it's 2 million or more, you're automatically asked. As I said, we experienced it as an employer ourselves, and we were prepared to provide it, and we weren't asked for it.
Okay. All right, thank you so much.
Excellent. Ms. Singh.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you again for coming. One of the questions I had, and it kind of dovetails into what many of the other folks have asked as well, is that the no question, based on that slide, that you guys represented some of the most hardest hit industries, no question. Has your membership returned back to its pre-pandemic numbers in terms of the union, or?
No.
And then I guess the question is how has that impacted the services that you're able to provide the existing members?
Well, it's been tough. I mean, we have experienced some dramatic downturns in the past, like after 9/11, we had the same sort of thing. It didn't last as long. So I had been through that. So we immediately laid off all of our staff, and we had people come in and work as volunteers because there was still a tremendous demand. There was this tremendous need from folks. So we were able to also raise some money for relief for our members. So that was very helpful. But now we have everyone back working. thanks in part to the PPP loan. We have some savings. We're unclear about what the next year's going to be. We are hoping that by March of 2022, the convention business comes back, which is a big thing. But we're going to have to see, right? So we're going to have to see how it goes. I mean, some, as you saw from those numbers, some industries are back and some aren't. And like I said, a big one is the convention business.
The ripple effect of this continues.
Yes, it continues.
Roxy, thank you again. Fabulous work by your organization. Thank you. We have a lot of work to do, obviously.
Great. Thank you, and thank you for all your support.
Thank you. And now we're looking for Ms. Heather Iliff. Yes, fabulous. Your presentation is on Maryland nonprofits.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. Thank you, members of the work group. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Heather Iliff, and I'm president and CEO of Maryland Nonprofits. And we ourselves are a nonprofit organization. We're a 501c3 charitable organization. Our mission is to strengthen organizations and networks for greater quality of life and equity. And under our umbrella, we now have three other entities, affiliates. The first is the Maryland Association of Resources for Families and Youth. These are the providers of foster care and residential treatment centers for children who have been victims of abuse and neglect. We also just merged with or acquired Maryland Latinos Unidos, a startup organization that was created in response to the pandemic, and the sense that there really wasn't a statewide network of people monitoring and advocating on behalf of the Latino community. And we also have the Standards for Excellence program, the Standards for Excellence Institute, which is 25 years old and was created here in Maryland and has been spread by Maryland nonprofits and has been spread across the country as a top benchmark for how highly ethical and accountable nonprofits operate. And you can get accredited through the Standards for Excellence Institute through us, as well as a whole range of resources on how to operate your organization with the highest levels of ethics and responsibility. As I mentioned, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. This is our board of directors, and we have a vibrant staff serving Maryland's 32,000 nonprofit organizations. We have 1,300 member organizations, and we provide training, technical assistance through the COVID pandemic. The demand for what we offered tripled as nonprofits needed to navigate a very fast-moving environment that was happening on multiple fronts. So if you can imagine all of the troubles that businesses go through in terms of the layoffs and the balance sheets and everything, and trying to navigate new, novel funding vehicles that might be out there. And at the same time, nonprofits not only are meeting the already existing need in the communities and many pre-existing inequities that lead to many members of our community needing help on an ongoing basis from nonprofits when it's not a pandemic. And then all of that work went through the roof. So I think you probably saw in the news the many, long lines for food distribution. That's probably the most visible. And I'll say that, many nonprofits that never did food distribution before suddenly were doing 3 distributions a week with mobilizing many, many volunteers and themselves on the front lines as nonprofit leaders, also having all those same pressures on, a third of nonprofit leaders had children under 12, a quarter had children under 12 in the home. If you were a person of color, it was more like a third of children under 12 at home, in the home. And 70% of executive directors of nonprofit organizations are women. And as you know, the pandemic hit women very hard. So we did a survey. Oh, well, let me share just a little background on how nonprofits are funded. So obviously, our budgets are all interconnected between the federal, state, municipal, governments as well as the local nonprofits. That 29.4%, it was a few years pre-pandemic, but that's about the level of Maryland's budget that comes from federal sources. And so I heard you asking in the previous question, how did Maryland do? How did the federal government do? This is a real handshake that works well sometimes and not so well others, because many things that you think Maryland is funding, you just peel behind the veneer of that, and it's really federal dollars with very few Maryland dollars going in, which makes it a little harder sometimes for us to influence quality and what's going on there. So this is the national data, and I'm going to show you what our more local data looks like. But many people hear that the majority of charitable giving comes from individuals, that 80 or 90% of the funding comes from individuals. That figure is talking about the small slice of overall nonprofit revenue that is charitable giving. So the majority of charitable giving does come from individuals. That's that 9.6%. And then you've got foundations at 2%. The corporations at a really, I would say, reprehensible 0.7%, given the record profits that we've seen. And nonprofits are primarily businesses. So 47.5% of the revenue is fee for service, just like any other business. And then 32.5% coming from government contracts, again, like many other businesses. So we have diverse revenue streams. So this includes the big hospitals and universities and private schools and things like that. So I've often wanted our own dollar bill for the kinds of nonprofits that we serve. And we had a survey that had we had about 800 people responded, about 550 organizations gave us very detailed information about their financials, and found that among the kinds of organizations that we serve, which are going to be your visible in the community, like I mentioned, your food bank, your mental health clinic, your museum, so small associations, all of those kinds of organizations are the ones that tend to be members of Maryland nonprofits. And you see that government funding jumps up to 51% of all the revenue coming in. This is, we took all the dollars and divided them. There's another chart that shows how it plays out in an individual nonprofit, and then 21% fee for service. So Maryland nonprofits, as I mentioned, we're a 501c3. Where do we get fees? So people pay to come to our annual conference. We have a consulting shop. So nonprofits pay consulting fees to hire us for strategic planning or needs assessment or fundraising activities. So they pay a fee to be part of the Standards for Excellence and get accredited. So we have about 80% of our revenue comes from fee for service from the nonprofits who we serve primarily, and about 20% in grants. So you can see foundations are about 13%, individuals 9%. So when we see big changes in the economy, we really have our eye on that fee for service and government revenue primarily, and rarely does individual or corporate giving make up the gap.
Could I just ask a question?
Sure.
Where are the large not-for-profits like hospitals and schools? Are they included in this dollar bill or not?
They're not as much in this. They don't answer my surveys as much. They've got their whole own departments, but they're in this figure. Yeah.
Maybe we can send out a survey.
Yeah. So, we have legal services, those kinds of things. If you're Hopkins, you got, a whole wing that does that. So although Johns Hopkins is a member, so I will say that they do a lot of, some may be familiar with the late Lester Solomon, who just passed away a couple months ago, was one of the world's leading researchers in nonprofit data at Hopkins. So if you think about like hospital and tuition fees being in that fee for service more in this version of the national level dollar bill, and I can drill down, let me skip ahead a little bit. So this is what Maryland's nonprofit sector looks like. So you can see that the 911 nonprofits that are over 5 million in revenue take home 92% of all the revenue. So those of us who are less than, our organization is about a $2 to $3 million organization. We're all sharing less than 8% of all the money going into nonprofits. And if your organization is led by an executive who's Black, Indigenous, or other a person of color, you're much more likely to be heading a very small, all volunteer organization. So if you look at statewide, 60% of all organizations that are less than 25,000 in revenue are led by people of color. So we think of this as an infrastructure in waiting. These are people who have gone through all the hoops to become an independent 501c3. They have a board of directors. They're mobilizing volunteers in their community to address the systemic inequities in our system, and they're doing it for free in a pandemic. So this group of people really, and this group of organizations got little or no relief of any kind during, and it's the way that a lot of the relief programs are designed. They're designed for the larger players.
Yes, Mr. Schaffel had a question. That's really a brilliant observation that you're making here. So, but Mr. Schaffel, go ahead.
I think that's been a theme of this whole work group, is how much easier it is for those with, legacy connections or resources to benefit from the programs, where that might have been where you really need it. So I was just wondering if you could expand on that a little bit, if you have any ideas of what could be done to get more resources to those.
Yes. So, and let me share a little bit further, some more data as well. But I'll just say, I'm going to echo the previous speaker who talked about the PPP being very accessible and easy to do if you had a bank that was going to call you back. That application was on 2 pages, and the forgiveness was relatively simple. We got a $220,000 PPP, and that was forgiven for Maryland nonprofits. It was all based on how many staff do you have. That was the whole calculation. So all of these organizations, if you're less than 50,000 as an organization, chances are you don't have any staff. You probably have some contractors. So you were just completely aced out of that whole opportunity, despite the fact that you have increased your level of activity serving your community very significantly during COVID. Those instruments were not designed for nonprofits who were meeting community needs. They were designed for businesses that were experiencing a loss of operations. So for example, PPP was really the best, but it was imperfect. It asked for your owners to sign, for example. Nonprofits don't have owners. So most of the time, even though we're 12.5% of the private sector labor force, we get forgotten when public policy gets made.
Let me ask this, if I could, just because it kind of jumps off the page. Why doesn't the state have a $50 million revolving fund?
Right?
that vetted not-for-profits that are actually doing the government's work, which is food banks and medical trips, et cetera, but they don't have a lot of employees, but that they're eligible for a no questions asked, 1-page application that you guys could sign off on because you're familiar with them, where they could get some stimulus from the state in recognition of their contributions.
I think that's very much needed. We actually have a letter to the governor saying, if the state is facing multiple billions in surpluses over last year, this year, and next year, $1 billion should be set aside for people like you're, serving those union members, for people who are hardest hit in the pandemic, and the nonprofits who are serving them.
A little higher than 50 million, but I will defer to your. Yeah.
We'll take the 50 million and raise you an exponent. Yeah, the needs are pretty big. So looking at the sources of revenue again, there wasn't a whole lot of difference in the sources of revenue if you're a Black-led or person of color-led nonprofit versus white-led. They were pretty similar. Sorry, I'm mixing up my slides here a little bit. This is related to that slide I showed earlier. About the 92% of the revenue being in the top 3.4% of organizations. So after the start of pandemic in August of 2020, we asked people in each of these areas of revenue. And we didn't ask one big question, are you up, down, total? But the United Way did, and found that about half of nonprofits were down financially after COVID. But you can see that fee for service was just decimated. So this is the similar thing that happened to the business community, that the things that you're offering out in the community as a business are not possible during the pandemic. But we even saw 25% of organizations saw cuts from government, 38% saw cuts from foundations, and almost 50% saw the individual donations plummet. So all revenue streams were under pressure in some ways during COVID. And sorry, the header on this is kind of small, but the declines that were catastrophic, as 50% or more cut in a given revenue area, were far more likely to be experienced by the people of color-led nonprofits. So you can see that, 52% saw more than a 50% decline in their fee for service, et cetera. So what happened with the aid? So 60% of the people in our survey got the PPP, which means 40% did not. So that's still really good coverage for a program that was very confusing for a nonprofit, because nonprofits don't typically take out very many loans. And so boards and lawyers and everybody was kind of looking at this crossways for a while. And we were just out there going, everybody should be applying for the PPP, apply for it, apply for it, apply for it. And a lot of people still didn't until later. And so had it been a zero-sum game like it was in the very beginning, where there was like that mad rush, this data would have been so much worse, because those smaller, less sophisticated nonprofits that didn't have that relationship with their bank were completely aced out of the process. And certain banks just wouldn't respond at all. We did find that the smaller community banks and the credit unions were far more responsive and helpful to the small nonprofits. These other pieces of aid are just a bit more complex and have more requirements, and so not as many nonprofits were able to take advantage of them. There were some statewide programs, and this was from our 2020 survey. There have been more since, which I'll comment on. So you remember that first $10,000 that Department of Commerce put out. So about a fifth of the people got that. There were some private philanthropy funds and other local COVID relief. But as you can see, this is really not very high penetration for that kind of relief. And then there was the Nonprofit Recovery Initiative. Of all of the ones besides the PPP, this one was the best managed. So DHCD actually reached out to us before they put these grants on the street, and we were like, oh, don't do it that way. Do it this way, please. And they were really nice and took our advice. We were grateful for. So that was a very straightforward application. It was more than to the 2 pages, but it was easier to apply for. But with that, if you didn't have an audit, you could only apply for $10,000. And our standards say if you're smaller than $500,000 as an organization, it's not worth it to spend 15 grand on your audit, So it's not even a best practice if you're that small to have an audit. And so there are just things that screen out the smaller players, even though they were way punching above their weight in meeting the needs of the community during COVID. The second round of PPP had to show steep revenue declines. And again, what I was saying, like a lot of nonprofits saw increases in demand. Maybe they were able to maintain or not have as steep to qualify for that second PPP. But you did see groups like the YMCA taking those, the ones that are big venue based. Shuttered Venues Operating Grant, we estimate that about 2/3 of the groups on that list were nonprofits who got that grant. They are still struggling. Though all the small, single carrot theater and, all of those are really, really struggling to survive still. And the The General Assembly's ARPA money, so as you recall, it was like before ARPA passed, General Assembly said, we're going to do this 20 million relief fund and then ARPA, and then it was like filled in with ARPA money after the fact. It's not a very scientific way to describe it. But in the infinite wisdom of the General Assembly, they thought it would be more equitable to provide the money to each of the 24 counties in Baltimore City, or 23 in Baltimore City. That ended up being a massively difficult, lengthy, problematic process because each county had to make up their thing from scratch. There were all kinds of different requirements in different counties, different amounts, different priorities. One county even announced that they put it through their Economic Development Corporation, or whatever they call those. And they put out that we're going to support light manufacturing. And it's just like, well, nonprofits aren't real big in the light manufacturing area. So we would have liked that to have been centrally managed, but just to ensure that each of the 24 jurisdictions get their share. If that's the intent, having each of the 24 manage it was difficult. So take that and multiply it by 1,000 for the rest of ARPA. So what did we do with our PPP money? We hired your old employee, Neil Bergsman from the state budget office, to come in and try to bird dog, where the heck is this money? It's going to 161 municipalities, 24 counties with multiple agencies at the federal level. And so far, the only one giving anything significant away is Baltimore City.
Yeah, it's a total cop-out. And I'm just apologizing on behalf of state government because we have dropped the ball. And this is just, I hate to say that I have a set opinion already, but the federal government, I'm embarrassed to be saying, is so much better than the state government at delivering infrastructure relief grants to the right recipients. And the idea that the state, I guess, because they did it in other areas, would just hand this responsibility out to the counties.
Yeah.
And just say, have at it. I mean, it's balkanization of something that should have been efficiently and effectively managed. It hasn't been, and I take it continues to be.
It's a big issue. So we actually spent $5,000 of our own money to hire a consultant to write a guide for local governments on how to give grants to nonprofits through ARPA. They're all completely confused. And the thing is, in my last slide is just to say, it ended up not being a good font, but COVID-19 is not over. So, people are still dying. We have 30,000 cases of COVID among fully vaccinated people. We have 315 people who have died of COVID who are fully vaccinated. It's really not that much different now than it was last November in terms of the danger out there and the needs that the community is facing. I'll also say about not only undocumented immigrants, but immigrants are not getting the kind of help that is needed. And they're, we wouldn't have a construction boom if it weren't for the, Latino labor force, frankly. And it's the same in all the caring professions in nonprofits. They're putting their lives on the line and they haven't been lifted out of poverty. So the levels of funding are not quite what they need to be. They're not right-sized for nonprofits necessarily. The funding is not always accessible. It seems to me like if the federal government can give out billions of dollars on a 2-page thing, why are we having to submit, like some of these RFPs are like 80 pages long for the RFP, and what you have to submit is like 300 pages, to get, your regular contract of the thing that you do every year. So it's hard. And a lot of that is because of that federal state handshake not getting figured out. We only have one person in our governor's grants office, or 2 people in our governor's grants office. So there's a lot more federal money out there if Team Maryland really rolls up its sleeves and works together to get it. And nonprofits are really good points of leverage to bring that money in. A lot of times what state and local government and tribes are eligible for, nonprofits are also eligible for, so we can be partners in bringing in millions of dollars into the state.
Okay, thank you very much, Heather Iliff, for that. That's an excellent presentation. I mean, I'm serious about this. This is we are deplorably inadequate at Maryland's level, the state level, the county level, the municipal level in having the infrastructure to deliver this relief to the people who need it, who are actually doing the work that we are trying to have them do and doing it fraud-free. So, and I
Yeah, and
I
an
hesitated to say
yeah.
the federal government was doing a better job than we were, but they obviously are. And we have somehow managed to pick a phrase, screw it up royally. And it's got to be corrected because there are too many people that are, because of this lack of infrastructure to deliver and implement and execute and get it to the right people on time without driving everybody crazy. That's not what Maryland's good at right now. So a few less press conferences bragging about how everything is just great would be, I think, a recommendation I would make, not to you, but to the local authorities and the state authorities, and a little more humility that they're just not getting the job done. So let me, and I'm upset about this because your members, you actually fill the void, for example, food distribution, that the government is also lacking infrastructure and lacking knowledge about how to do. So you're intimately involved with the nonprofits. You, obviously everyone is providing critical services, programs, and initiatives. And you're doing things that people expect their government to do. So thank you on behalf of this committee that's looking at this. We intend to correct these issues because, they are ripe for reform. Let's put it that way. But what has been your members' experience in requesting distribution of aid where you mentioned inequity between organizations? So how do we correct that?
Well, I think first you do need to look at the amount of funding. So the $20 million that went out to each of the 24 jurisdictions, in Prince George's County, I think they had $3 million to give away. They had more than $13 million in qualified proposals. Similar in Baltimore City, I think they had $2 or $3 million to give away. They had more than $20 million in qualified proposals. So, and this was repeated all around the state. So just the level of need that nonprofits who are able to fill out all the forms and jump through all the hoops, if you were to go by our example as Maryland nonprofits, so we have had a code on our timesheet for our COVID response, and we were only able to apply for that base where we're located, which is Baltimore City, and Baltimore City set the requirements, which I don't blame them, that it's for your services to Baltimore City residents. So we had to take what percentage of everything we do statewide happened in Baltimore City, which we do have a lot of members. There's a big nonprofit sector there. So it's 23%. So we got, 23% of our COVID costs were even eligible to apply for that grant. So where's that other, 77% coming
So
from?
how do you inject some flexibility into that process? I take it it's the centralization and the control and the one-page application rather than the 28-page application.
Yeah, and where the state may not have those mechanisms, the nonprofit sector does. So Baltimore City isn't used to being first, in the state, but with their portion of that 20 million, they gave that to the Baltimore Civic Fund, which is a quasi-governmental nonprofit that used to be the Baltimore City Foundation, you might be familiar with. They got the grant. They're one of the few ones that got them out on time by the deadline, and they had an equitable, community review process of those applications.
Well, hats off to Baltimore City. In a letter titled Letter to Maryland Leadership, what a great title. You authored and sent to my office as well as other political leaders throughout the state. And you laid out an excellent series of recommendations, many of which, frankly, I employed within the Comptroller's office, such as paying current invoices as quickly as possible. So it's not business as usual. But what was the response to your recommendations for other departments? And would you say that nonprofits were sufficiently considered in aid programs such as the Relief Act?
We are awaiting a response to that letter. I will say that throughout the government, we see massive problems and delays in nonprofits getting paid. So in some jurisdictions, for example, community development block grant funds might typically run 6 to 8 months late in a regular year. When I say 6 to 8 months late, I mean you're contracted to start your program on July 1st. You start your program on July. You get a letter saying you're approved for this as a letter, but not the contract. So, okay, I start my program and I'm expending money. It's cost reimbursement, but I haven't received my contract yet. So when would be reasonable to receive that contract? Like maybe by the end of July, maybe it's delayed. You get it by the end of September or something might be reasonable. Those typically would come in like February or March. You'd see your contract. So you haven't been able to invoice for anything yet until that date. So that's in a regular year. This year, we've got groups from fiscal year started July 2020, finished, still haven't gotten their contract yet, and obviously haven't been able to be paid for, $250,000 worth of work.
Okay, that is completely and utterly unacceptable, number one. Number two, I just want to have a final question before turning it over to my colleagues. This Maryland COVID Emergency Relief Grant Funds for 501c6 nonprofits, my understanding is that the window to apply for these funds was very limited, with the latest application window being August 17th to August 24th of 2020. What is that all about?
Yeah, anything other than a 501c3 got treated very differently by most of these relief funds. So the chambers of commerce, unions, professional associations, and others just got somewhat inexplicably left out from the federal government. And so anything that the state can do to help meet the needs of those businesses, it's true that they're not, quote, charitable nonprofits, but they are businesses. So if you can be a Chuck E. Cheese and get the money, why can't you be a Chamber of Commerce and get the money, right?
Absolutely. Excellent presentation. And let me ask the Deputy Comptroller.
So thank you so much for this presentation. It's been very enlightening, as the Comptroller said, very distressing, some of the things that you reported. And you said you had to use your own funds to hire a consultant in order to draft guidelines to aid government and being certain that they know how to develop policy for issuing grants. And just wanted to, my time's up now. And just wanted to know, did you receive any audiences with anyone in leadership after you completed that report?
So we have that event the launch event for that packet is coming up on November 17th. The first event we had was with Senator Cardin, and we had more than 100 local, either elected officials or appointed officials. We had probably a dozen small town mayors and others very interested in the information about ARPA. Local governments are really not too different than nonprofits. They're kind of like their own, small little islands, and they're trying to find the information about ARPA as well. And these laws, again, they don't always get written with nonprofits in mind. We lobbied nationally for it to say, grants to nonprofits are an allowable use in ARPA. So it's allowable, but it's not required. And so we've got to compete with potholes or anything else.
Thank you.
Great. Mr. Hildebrand.
Thank you, sir. And thank you very much for the presentation. One of the things you brought up during that was the burden on these nonprofits to try to figure out what to file, what money, how to get it, and then to comply with whatever rules came with it, which in some cases they didn't know from the laws. How much did that take off? If a small business is getting $10,000, and then you have a small nonprofit at 25,000 and under, how much are they losing from the money we wanted to help to figure out how to get money, how to file a report for what they've got?
It's, we have a typical amount of financial management and admin that any of us would have that might run you anywhere from 20 to 30% of your operations. I would say probably 10% of your overall operations is probably wasted on unnecessary regulations. If you're a largely government funded nonprofit, for some of those particular relief programs, it also meant that I've got 5 deadlines, next Tuesday, and there's no way I can make them all. And I'm just going to have to miss one of these, because a lot of these are 1 and 2 and 3 person shops. And like I said, it's like, they're the ones who are, they're opening their hatchback and unloading the food at the food bank when they got the kids strapped in the car. I mean, it is a hard life as a nonprofit leader these days. And they're not always able to apply for everything that they're eligible for. So making sure that it's clear, having it be consistent across the state, having it be easy to get, having it be designed for organizations that don't have employees as well as ones that do, all of those things are going to be important.
My other question is, again, in one of the slides, you were talking about like the first round of PPP, you were pretty much excluded. And then, as others came, and one of the slides, I believe you said Baltimore is just starting as one of the first to develop this money. Is it happening timely? Did we miss the mark in helping out, or is the money that's now coming out, are we still hitting the mark to help the people who need it? Getting the
So
funding?
I anticipate that Baltimore will get its money on the street probably by February or March. So if your meeting needs today, that's not today. But they're the first, so I applaud them and thank them for doing that. Where in other jurisdictions, I don't know where the next thing is coming from. So people have, their last PPP dollar has run out, they're still doing all the things and they don't necessarily see relief. I will say that there are some nonprofits that are doing well and they're thriving and have pivoted and figured out a new path forward. So it's not universal, but it is disproportionately impacting communities of color and organizations led by people of color.
And my last one, before I turn it back, earlier the comptroller had asked about the lessons learned. You have a lot of them in here. Again, on the hot seat, if you would like to give us something.
Yes, I did hear that invitation to follow up. We'd be delighted to. And I think keeping nonprofits in mind and the unique ways that nonprofits operate and what are the unique pressures on nonprofits during any crisis are some of the top 3.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Schaffel. Thank you, Mr. Hildebrand.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. And I think mine are sort of following up on what's been said a bit. Just wanted to focus on I have a lot of questions, but 2 questions in timeliness that I think the state can affect. You mentioned early in your presentation that when a program is federally funded, you seem to have a hard time being able to influence the quality of that program. So I guess that means like the state is bringing in some federal funds and the state is kind of administering that program. You don't feel like you get to have a lot of say in that simply because they're federal funds, even though it's a state program? Is that fair?
So a lot of money gets given back to the federal government because whatever node in the system hasn't known how to grant that out timely and get the requirements met timely. So this has been a chronic issue in the state of Maryland, and I think does need a structural review and response. Sometimes I think when we think about lessons learned and we look at what worked and the point that you made about the direct payments worked, like PPP worked with the exceptions that I mentioned, direct payments worked. Things that are simple and get the money into the hands of the people that need it are what works. And I'm just going to go somewhere a little bit different than maybe where you expected with this. A lot of what nonprofits do and the money that we manage is money that was designed to help poor people, that is designed to ameliorate structural poverty that we have created in our economy. And we have images in our mind of who those people are that are colored by systemic racism. And because of that, the nature of these programs, there is a presumption of corruption in the level of paperwork that nonprofits are required to produce. One thing goes sideways one year, and then there's a whole nother layer of paperwork on top of it. When a family, might just need $1,700 to get past whatever obstacle, it's got to go through so many different channels to figure out what program or service they might be eligible for, because there's a presumption that they're going to spend it at the liquor store, or they're going to, do something irresponsible with it. And I think that we need to look at ourselves as a society and say, why have we siloed this out to be so complicated to meet basic needs that should be met in our economy?
Did everybody hear that?
Yeah, I think that was.
I mean, that is a stunning description of what's wrong. And it needs to be, thank you for saying it that way. And hopefully we can get that down on paper and send it to people so that they understand that, hey, there might be a little bit of fraud here or there, but there's a tremendous amount of legitimate need that never gets met. So thank you for saying that. It's worth being in politics just to hear that. Yes.
Thank you.
So other questions for Ms. Iliff? Mr. Schaffel?
I have one more follow-up, and I'll just say, I come from an economics background, and that profession is generally always advocated for just giving people the money. Like, don't tell
Just
them what
give
to
them
do
the
with it,
money.
just give them the darn money. So I'm a big fan of that strategy.
Yeah, we'd be happy to go out of business if the system would work for the people that we serve.
Right. I wanted to kind of jump over a little bit. You mentioned that you found a much better support system from the regional banks and the credit unions. And, it seems like nationally, and it's funny, even your organization, we're all consolidating, right? And we lose touch with local needs that way and local resources, which obviously hurts in times like these. So if you could just expand on how important that was maybe a little bit. I think that's something
Yeah.
the comptroller's always talked about, is the importance of these regional
Yes.
financial institutions.
Yeah, I think it is important. And there's an analogy in the nonprofit sector because these, we're all mid-size, right? And in the business world, mid-size is an awkward stage to be. You either stay small and niche, or you get acquired and be big. So we're all in this awkward mid-size if we're not in this above 5 million group. And so we do need to find some economies of scale in how we operate. So one of the things that we're actually applying for ARPA money is to create a shared services program like businesses have for back office and what have you, so that we can achieve some of those economies of scale while retaining the genuine community-based relationships, the mom and pop nature of the way people appreciate being helped by their neighbors. So, I mean, how many of you, the old joke about people not wanting to stop and ask for directions, right? It is a very, very hard thing to say, I need help. People, the idea that poor people are lining up asking for help when they don't really need it is how these programs were designed. It's hard to ask for help, and it's much more likely that someone who needs help isn't going to ask for it if they don't have that trusted person in their community, in a local volunteer, a pastor, someone they trust. So trying to maintain that small, trusting, community accountable, community-led flavor while making these viable operations is part of what we see as our mission at Maryland Nonprofits.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Mr. Riley.
Thank you, Comptroller. Just a couple brief follow-ups, and you may have said this, but, following up on Andy and some of the things, how many of your nonprofits folded during this? Did you have some that just went out because they could not?
No, we didn't. So it's really hard to kill a nonprofit because you can operate for years with zero revenue. as a nonprofit. So unlike a business, if you get to zero revenue, you don't really have a business anymore. Whereas nonprofits can be volunteer led and can continue to do their mission with zero money. So there were predictions that many nonprofits would go out of business. We have seen a few consolidate or go out of business or change. They haven't been very public about it, but there hasn't been any large numbers of nonprofits going out of business that we've seen.
That's certainly encouraging, but I would submit though that the nonprofits still have to pay bills though.
Yes,
So,
they do.
you know, so
And yeah,
anyway,
they are
and
laying
I
off.
guess, and I wanted to follow up also quickly and suggest when you're giving the, how things could be improved, I'm very interested in, or was taken by the number of small organizations that are under the 25,000. So
Mhm.
how that application process could be made more equitable for them. So you don't have to go into that right now, but
Yeah,
if
I
you could
think we
make sure.
should probably put our pencils to paper and design the ideal sort of PPP for nonprofits.
And that would
We'll be
be-
happy to get back with you
That'd be
on that.
interesting. And the last quick question is, how long has that ARPA money been out there that has not gotten out to folks? How long has it been there?
Since March. Yeah.
March
I
of-
think that March of 2021,
So
ARPA
we're-
was passed.
So we're 7-8 months down the road and we still don't have that money out.
That's right.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Country.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Zank.
Absolutely. So I'm going to put on my finance hat for just a minute. So our group prepares the single audit, which of course is tied into federal grants and the pass-throughs that I'm sure some of your not-for-profits have received. So when as I looked at your annual report, I saw that there was a committee that appeared to be, you had kind of pushed to create the council, I believe it's called Maryland Efficient Grant Application, the Mega
Yes.
Council. And so near and dear to my heart, I actually took a look at the law, and it looks like in December, there's a report that will be coming out that will be talking about how that process will be streamlined. Curious, you sit on that council, and have you had an opportunity? Are you seeing some changes coming so that you can get more grant money, more pass-through money?
Yes, we were behind that bill, and we're glad to see the mega council in place and making recommendations. I personally have not been sitting on it, but my team, and we've also had nonprofits appointed to it. And they're coming out with a whole string of recommendations that I think would really improve things in Maryland. It's a subset of the government funding for nonprofits are grants. I think maybe more are contracts. And so we've also been pushing for procurement reform for honestly decades. And, it'll take us like a year and a half and we'll cheer like we got rid of blue ink signatures, yay. Where I think what we learned in the pandemic is just throw the old one out completely. Don't try to reform it. We just need to start from scratch on a clean sheet of paper with very simple approaches.
If you have a minute, I'd love to chat just a little bit about the Emma system that is coming. And I think that in some of your thoughts on procurement reform may actually, I think you're.
Yes, I'll give you my card. I'd be happy to follow up.
Excited to see
Thank
it.
you.
Other questions?
Just have one comment
Yes,
similar
please,
to what
Sharon, yes.
Andy raised. I mean, I think that because you have the common mission of, wanting to serve, that's why that was a great opportunity in alignment with the small community banks and the credit unions, because I know that they were very intentional. They wanted to make certain that they were available to the nonprofits during this time. So I do think that there are opportunities to continue that moving forward. I also know that they, unfortunately, in the first round, did not have access as the larger banks did to funds. And so I think that's why you were able to see the difference in round two, because those funds became available to those smaller community banks and credit unions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, thank goodness that, our congressional delegation fought also for that second round, because it was really looking like the Hunger Games there for a while. It was pretty awful. And so, again, things that are more tailored for nonprofits might work better.
Well, first of all, the fear of fraud, which you brought up as a motivator for what turns out to be, in fact, bias, that's alive and well. And we, for example, are terrified in the Comptroller's office of fraud as far as tax refund requests. So we spend a considerable amount of time protecting the Maryland Treasury from fraud.
Right. and s-
But we get $3 billion in refunds back within 2.5 business days. It doesn't cut down on the speed
Mhm.
because people need the money.
Right.
But unfortunately, these other state agencies, which are not connected to us, have neglected the kind of partnerships that are needed to protect against fraud, move that argument out, and allow them to put the money quickly into the pockets of nonprofits that desperately need it.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a mistaken idea that more paperwork equals less fraud. And I don't know if that's ever been proven, but it does lead to less utilization of the funds and less, which then we have to give back money. So there's a cost to that. And, literally, if one of our members got asked for the audit for the past year, and they were like, you mean for the audit for the money that we never got? Is that the audit that you were talking about?
Got it. Okay, thank you very much. It's been a splendid testimony, and I really appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
So now we have Ms. Clute, and I'm afraid I've been mispronouncing your name, Ms. Clute. Thank you for being here, and really grateful for your patience. And please give us your presentation.
Good afternoon, Comptroller and everyone present here. My name is Naddia, and I am here with the Maryland Small Business Development Center, and I am actually the lead of the Hispanic Business Center. I will talk a little bit just so you guys are familiarized with what Maryland Small Business Development Center does. So we provide training on core business topics, specialty topics. Right now, and since COVID have hit, all of our training have moved into virtual platforms through webinars, Zoom, WebEx. In addition to that, we have been providing counseling on a one-on-one basis on a virtual platform, being able to help and assess businesses and what are their needs, assist them on developing a business plan, creating a business plan, as well as during COVID, being able to develop a strategic plan for those small businesses that have been heavily impacted by COVID. And last but not least, we do provide technical assistance that included any of the grants, PPP, EIDL that were available through the federal government, as well as a state and county level. To share a little bit about myself, I came on board in September of last year with Maryland Small Business Development Center as part of the CARES Act funding that they received. I was hired as a finance specialist to help all the businesses impacted by COVID. Prior to that, I have been heavily working one-on-one with the small businesses, and I provided a lot of guidance and assistance on different programs, and I work directly with Montgomery County. In addition to that, my job has been able to provide different evaluation as to what is happening with the Hispanic community, how have they been affected. So with the different programs and funds that we receive, we were able to provide and hire additional training individuals. We were able to develop the Business Sustainability Center, which we hire a variety of consultants in the areas of finance, restaurant marketing, and innovation. In addition to that, we were able to hire a bilingual training coordinator who helped facilitate training and anything that had to do with how to apply for PPP, those different updates that were constantly coming out in PPP and EIDL. We were able to bring different representatives and provide the training in Spanish for the community. We had the ability to hire a retail specialist and a real estate consultant, which came a key component to, especially for those small businesses who were falling behind in rent, who had a difficulty applying for PPP, to be able to get some sort of assistance for their businesses to be able to pay their rent. We brought additional consultants. So pre-COVID, Maryland Small Business Development Center only had one dedicated Hispanic consultant, which was Mrs. Maricela Villamil. With the CARES Act fund, we were able to bring a total of 4 additional consultants in the counties of Montgomery, Anne Arundel, and then there were other individuals that just worked throughout the state. We were able, like I mentioned, had the ability to provide additional training and resources dedicated just for businesses impacted by COVID. It wasn't just a simple of PPP and EIDL, but how to get your financials, how to get your business back in good standing, because a lot of those programs did require your business to be in good standing in the state to be able to qualify for any sort of assistance. We increased the interaction with SBA and other financial institutions to be able to provide a variety of resources. As previous presenters have mentioned today, businesses, the typical businesses had already established a banking relationship with their institution. So they had a better way to access those PPP programs that a lot of other small businesses in the Hispanic community, some of them didn't have established relationship. Some of them had an operating account that they were just using, but they had no idea how they could go through their portal to be able to apply for any sort of assistance through their banking institutions. So just to bring up some of the data that we pull from our system. So this is the data that we provide the SBA as their provide the funding for the services that we offer at no-cost customers. So you can see that pre-COVID, 2018, 2019, we had a total of, on average, 44 to 67 new businesses started. And then during COVID, that number went slightly down to 62. And this report is as of September 13. So it went down to 51, but overall, we do expect to have a similar number compared to 2019. So what is that indicating for the Hispanic community is that individuals are still looking to start a business for one reason or the other. COVID-19 has not stopped them from taking that mindset of being an entrepreneur and taking that opportunity to start and grow a business. We did see actually a decrease on some of the job created on the full-time and part-time, especially this year. I think last year, some of the business had leftover profits from 2019, which allowed them to maintain and have a certain number of employees. But once that funding started depleting, then they start having to let go. In addition to that, I think the biggest thing that we have to highlight is the fact that the number of total clients counseled went from 306 pre-COVID to 452 in 2020 and 435 only, 3/4 of the year. So that shows that we are servicing a lot of clients in the community, and still, even though we have now 5 consultants, there are still not enough resources available for the community. Our hours of entrepreneurs that attended at least one training, it increased tremendously. It went from 149 individuals that attended training to 629. That had to do because we were keeping up to date with all the information that was coming out on programs, grants. We were bringing financial institutions. We were providing different guidance and services for small businesses who maybe their banking institution might have not been the right solution to apply for some of the guidance and programs. So, and the biggest component here is you guys can see on almost at the bottom of this data is the COVID assistance received by Hispanic clients. They receive $2.5 million compared to from all of our clients who receive COVID-19 assistance, which that was over $65 million. So only 3.9% of Hispanic clients got approved to receive assistance. So that just shows a huge gap between all of our clients versus the Hispanic community. And why is that? You know, there are a multitude of reasons as to some of the observations that we have. They do have the need for funds. They don't know where to get it. They don't know where to go. That information doesn't come rapidly available in Spanish. So they are reliant on their partners, on their consultants, on their friends to tell them, hey, there is this grant available, there is this program available, you need to apply. They are afraid of applying. They don't trust a lot of financial institutions just because of how typically the relationship is built up and they are in their home country. So they might not have that trust. They're like, well, you know, is this a scam? They are even afraid of applying because it might be a scam and they are afraid of putting their information out there to get some of the assistance that they truly need. The paperwork application and process is overwhelming for them. The certificate of good standing, let alone was, you know, them trying to figure it out. Is my LLC in good standing? Is my LLC not? Do I need to print a report? Do I need to pay the $50 fee to get a certificate of good standing? Or is a screenshot enough? And then there was the backlog to get their business back in good standing.
Could I just stop there and interrupt? Because remember the previous speaker?
Yes.
Fear of fraud, but it's a cover. It's a cover for something else that exists out there. And I find it to be just unbelievable that we're unable to see this document-rich requirement as anything other than bias. It's not to protect against the taxpayers being taken advantage of. And I look at this and I just think of what you're saying, which is so crucial. And nonetheless, the Hispanic community is continuing to apply and continuing to open up new businesses. But we keep saying, oh no, we're concerned about something. Well, hopefully that's going to change. I don't know whether you agree with it, but I think the two of you are kind of sharing some common territory.
Yeah, I think the fact of the matter is a matter of building a trust. So if I talk with the client, with the Hispanic client, and I'm doing a consulting, and he's like, look, my business is suffering, and I'm aware of the programs that are available. And if I say, here it is information, here is directly where you need to go and apply, they will trust the source. But if it's just information that maybe is put through the state website, through the county website, they have this fear that where is the small print? You know, when are they going to come back and ask me, and how much interest am I going to have to pay? And it's like, no, these are programs that are available to help your business because you have been impacted by COVID, because you need to prove that your business has been negatively impacted by COVID.
I may be wrong in this, but I say all over the state, there's a tremendous amount of fear in your community. And it's also about immigration status.
There is.
Can they trust not just the bank, can they trust the law enforcement officer?
There is,
And
because
so it's into that somewhat legitimate, fearful thing that I say to citizens of the state, if we don't have immigrants coming to our state, you can just forget the prosperity of our state's economy, because we need, for example, the Hispanic citizens that right now are just bursting with entrepreneurial innovation, but they're scared to ask, I guess. Or
they are, and as you say, they are afraid. They are afraid that their legal status, even though it's not asked through the application process, that somehow there will be a crossover of information, and then someone is going to come and knock on their door and say, you need to go.
You know, I had a businessman the other day, yesterday, in fact, say, could you please make it legal for us to hire people who may not have documents? Because we need them. And they have a work ethic, and they have families, and they live here. But we can't, you know, if they don't have the right little social security number or something,
Yeah, especially if they are above a certain number of employees, the fact that they have to put them through the E-Verify system, and the list goes on. You have people who are ready to roll their sleeve, who want to work, who, if you give them the opportunity, they are more than happy to have their, withholding taxes be deducted out of their paycheck. They are not concerned of that, but they are concerned of taking the risk of
Yes.
going out and working and earning the money through their labor, and then being penalized for that because of their legal status.
sorry I interrupted, but go ahead. Why don't you finish up and we'll ask some questions, but thank you.
Some of them had to quickly adapt to technology, and technology sometimes, with some of the individuals and business owners out there, that is not their forte. They had to quickly adjust to joining Zoom, to how do I pull my bank statement out of an online platform. In addition to that, the expense report. Prior to joining SBDC, I work with a nonprofit in Montgomery County to help childcare providers. You would not believe how difficult it was for them to be able to apply for grants that are available, because they're like, look, I'm a sole proprietor. I don't have QuickBooks. I rely on my accountant at the end of the year. I provide my bank statements. I have my receipts, and they do the tax return. But I don't have a month-to-month expense report to know, what are my operating expenses so that I can get grant assistance. And a lot of the grant assistance that was available out there, they were like, okay, what is your average 3 to 6 month expenses? Submit, your previous profit and loss report. They were like, what is a profit and loss? What is a balance sheet? They had to get educated on that. The fact of that they needed to upload documents for all of these different grants that were available, they're like, how do I do that? Can I take a picture? Do I need to send a scanned version? Like, do I need to go to FedEx and scan it? And how do I upload it? How do I email it? Those were the things that were working in their disadvantage. The fact that a lot of the information and application process typically gets released in English and then slowly gets released in Spanish. So how can we go about providing the same resources simultaneously to ensure that they get the benefit as the application gets released the same day? The fact that there is technical assistance available in their own language, and that they don't have to jump on the phone and wait an hour or 2 hours for somebody to be able to answer one of their questions in regards to the application process. The language barrier was a big one. There are programs that were available, but they were like, I need to hire somebody to submit my application. And then, unfortunately, some of these small businesses were taken advantage of by other individuals who said, okay, I'm going to charge you $1,000 and I will submit your application. And it's like, why did you do that? Why, when there were nonprofits ready and available out there, but they're like, but I don't know who else to trust. I don't know who I need to go to ask them the right questions. There was, like I mentioned, not enough one-on-one support and technical assistance for them to be able to apply for the grants programs that were available. And their legal status. We had clients who are under the TPEs, the TPS, or other immigration status that was preventing them, or they quite didn't feel comfortable on applying for grants because of their legal status. So some general observations that we had. There was a need for education and additional resources in the Hispanic community, and that's what we have been able to deliver to them. Clients, having the low trust on financial institutions because the overall experience clients had in their home country and the fact that they might feel like there might be a scam in some sort of way. The reduction of resources once the CARES Act funds runs out. So in this case, Maryland SBDC has been able to increase the number of consultants because the organization received part of the CARES Act fund that allow us to hire a variety of consultants to support the community. And once those funds run out, then that underserved community would remain underserved because we wouldn't have the different resources to keep supporting them in their own language. And as the COVID crisis abates, small businesses still require the support to strengthen their business as they need to mitigate the long-term effects that COVID is having on their businesses. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank
for
you.
the
Once
opportunity.
again. No, I just want to ask a couple of quick questions. The National Bureau of Economic Research found that in June of 2020, quote, nationally, an estimated 41% of Black-owned businesses, not talking not-for-profits, we're talking about businesses, 41% of Black-owned businesses, 32% of Latino-owned businesses, 26% of Asian-owned businesses closed, while only 17% of white-owned businesses closed. Now, I don't want to create any controversy out there, but you've assisted small businesses across Maryland. Is it your observation that this trend was experienced somehow in Maryland? And do you believe the trend has any possibility, I hope not, of continuing through 2021?
Yeah, so I do think that is correct. And that's where you get the new business startups. A lot of the businesses that end up closing and had to lay off their employees, some of them are starting their own little, construction company, their little bookkeeping, accounting company. And that's what they are having to do. Why? Because of their legal status, they can't receive unemployment. So they had to come up with creative ways to be able to support their family. So that's why you see also the number of startups increasing. And we expect that to keep increasing because just generally speaking, as on the state level throughout white, African, Asian, and Hispanic, we have seen the number of startup business increasing this year.
I have seen that data and it gives me a little bit of hope. But think of the complexities of doing that and the turmoil that occurs. I understand Latinos had their PPP loans approved at half the rate of white-owned businesses around the country. Is that anything you see reflected here?
Correct. That's why you see on the data that I pulled that only about 3% compared to, so 97% of our clients who are white, African, non-Latino receive a lot of the COVID-19 assistance that was available, and only about 3 to 4% was for Hispanic.
And did that apply also to the state Relief Act funds, other state and local relief programs, what you just described from the federal PPP?
So we don't have that data specifically, so I quite couldn't make an observation in regards to that.
I beg people around the state, because there are a lot of conservative people that think the federal relief was way too much money, and they're very concerned even about other federal funding coming in. I keep looking at them and saying, folks, the reason you have some financial stability is because of the federal relief. It came in and stabilized everything, stock market included. So don't be too strict in your thinking about old ideas, that spending money when we need to spend money is a bad idea. No, that's a good idea. And I am someone who's been somewhat educated. So I used to say, gee, maybe that's going to produce all sorts of bad things and it's kind of fiscally irresponsible. No, if we are in a crisis like we're in right now with your community, we need to spend money.
Yeah.
will help all of us maintain our level of prosperity.
Yeah.
Thank you for, you and the previous speaker have just been phenomenal. And Madam Deputy Comptroller, go ahead.
So thank you, and I have more, it's not a question, it's an opportunity. Just hearing everyone speak today, I know that Comptroller Branco, you have really expanded our Hispanic outreach since your tenure as Comptroller, and I see an opportunity that we could collaborate with the different associations that we have in this room. I think we could also bring in some of the financial institutions and just provide some type of outreach and help prepare.
Yes, we
the
answer
small
70,000 phone calls from Spanish speakers only a year. And we have bilingual employees of every one of our divisions. Because if you can't, I mean, really, if you can't understand the language, and we're unable to have folks there that can speak Spanish, it's really a uphill battle. But there are lots of other things,
Yeah.
Madam Deputy Comptroller, because I do think there's something, our outreach people like Adriana Lee, who's where is she?
businesses.
There she is, right there. Yeah, Adriana, thank you for being here. I mean, she heads up our outreach effort. But we
I
spend,
see a symposium, workshop, something.
yeah,
where
no, I
all
like
the
that
lessons
idea.
learned that we have from these various meetings and be able to.
Excellent. That would be a great suggestion. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead. Mr. Riley.
Thank you, Comptroller. Appreciate it. Just a couple follow-up questions, and thank you for the presentation as well. I know that David's going to ask you for some lessons learned and all that, and so he'll answer that question. But one of the things, if you could put in there for us to understand, one of your slides said that only 3.9% of Hispanic businesses received those funds. Can you put that into numbers for your clients? We're talking 5,000, applications and whatever. And also, could you layer in with that, with the ones that did receive grants, funds, whatnot, was it centered in any type of certain business activity?
Yeah, so we will be able, I can have our analytical person for the SBDC pull some of that more specific data for you, and I can do a follow-up in regards to that. That way you have all that
Thanks.
information.
And then the lesson learned, obviously, from what you were saying is that people couldn't apply if they couldn't understand. And so a lot of the forms didn't come out so that they could actually use them. So the question is, how many forms are still that way?
Well, as far as we are aware of, there is not a lot of assistance that is available out there. We are being asked every day for those people that were put on unemployment or that were let go, that are not starting their business. They are asking, is there any assistance and resource? I have been on unemployment. I'm trying to get a job that is not working. I need to generate some sort of revenue, but I'm living month to month. I'm living, unemployment paycheck to paycheck. So is there anything else available out there? And it's hard to say that for new startup businesses, there is not a lot of resources available out there.
And I guess then, perhaps maybe I should have clarified and asked that question a different way. If a program and the application process was out there, how long did it take, in your experience, for the forms and whatnot to be in languages that folks could understand?
It probably took for them to realize that there were available resources about a week. Generally speaking, what had worked out is for organizations to reach out, like as an example, in the childcare community, there is, a Hispanic leader who is also a childcare provider. And once they find out about a grant that was becoming available, then she will share the word with all of her contacts. And then from there, they will initiate the process. But generally speaking, it took them a lot of time for them to realize that there were available even resources and technical assistance for their needs.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Ms. Zink?
Yeah, actually, my questions were, you answered almost all of, oh, thank you. I mean, you answered nearly all of them. I was looking at the numbers and statistics. I wasn't sure what the story was behind all of the interest in all of the training classes, but you obviously explained that, so no further questions.
I'm sorry, what did you ask?
I'm done. So
Oh, great, yes. Let's go with Mr. Schaffel and then finish with Mr. Hildebrand.
Yeah, not so much a question as I think a common theme. It sure seems like whenever we're developing all these grand state and federal programs, this was a lesson learned from the Affordable Care Act. We need navigators. We need people that speak the intended recipients' language. And I don't just mean whether it be Spanish, but I mean can actually communicate with them effectively and steer them into the right programs for them. And we keep throwing a lot of money at programs and then not helping people benefit from them. It seems like a gap that we'll keep making, and I just hope it's a strong recommendation for this work group
Thank you.
that we focus.
Yeah, I would probably say in regards to that, there needs to be some sort of, while I understand the resources can be put and be made available, I think there has to be a marketing technique behind that so that you're able to reach the Hispanic community so that they are aware that it is available, that assistance, technical assistance is available through a Zoom, through a phone call, whatever it is that the organization wants to set up. But I think that is also a key element in the assistance that they are trying to receive is the outreach. What is the marketing strategy to outreach to those underserved communities?
I think you seem to come from like a financial background, right?
Yes,
And
I do.
people that don't have a financial background are very intimidated by things of financial nature, and that's difficult. So,
Yes.
yeah, agree. Thank you.
Mr. Hildebrand, thank you
Sir.
very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. As Chris stole my thunder on the lessons learned, please again, make sure you get that into us. I just had one question / observation. You managed to increase your staffing and resources during this, but then indicated that funding is going away. When is it? Do you know when you're going to lose that additional funding?
So the funding that we have remaining through the CARES Act, we have until next year to utilize it. So once that funds run out, whichever comes first, the fund runs out or the year comes to an end, then those resources won't longer be available.
So I guess my big question there is, isn't that exactly when you need more business development as we're coming out of COVID to ramp those things up to keep us on a good economic path? You know, it would seem to me that's when you need more of what you're doing, not take the money away.
Exactly. And that is why, as an organization, they are looking and evaluating and maintaining the relationship with counties specifically who, as Montgomery County, as PG County, and certain other counties who have a higher Hispanic population to see what some sort of funding they have available that they can facilitate and said, hey, this is geared for specific programs just for the Hispanic community, because there is a need out there. So how do you establish that dialogue, how that funding comes from the state to the counties with a specific goal to say, hey, this has to go to the Hispanic community for specific resources, technical assistance, develop toolkits, marketing, outreach to the community so that they are aware of the services that are available for them.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Clute, and we are going to conclude the hearing, and we will have one next month and regularly thereafter, because there's obviously a tremendous amount of equity and reform and improvement that is possible in this area. So thank everyone who testified today, all the folks on the workforce that are asking questions, everybody who is doing the camera work and the figuring out how to have the sound system work, all of the staff people, I appreciate it. And we welcome any questions or inquiries from the public. And we will let you know when the next hearing is, and hopefully everyone will participate. Thank you all very much. Sure. Thank you.